Hello and welcome to Melhem Project Team 3's final project presentation. My name is Mike Shore and I will be speaking on behalf of Satish Ponnoly and Matthew Sims. In the presentation today, I will provide a background for our project, explain what our scope of work was. Then I will walk through 3 primary risks that we identified and the mitigation strategy for each of those risks. Then I will explain our project schedule and then give you a demonstration of each of our deliverables. After that, I will walk through some of the project issues and successes that we had along the way. And then I'll finish with a review of our lessons learned. So the background for our project is our client is named PPM Global Services. PPM Global Services provides project management training, consulting, and staff augmentation. Our project sponsor and the company owner is a gentleman named Jake Lilly. So here's the problem that PPM Global Services was and is facing. They're expanding at a rapid rate. Within the past 6 months, they've gone from having 2 to 5 active projects, and they've gone from having 3 to 10 consultants on staff. So given this rapid expansion, they wanted to make sure that they continue to expand without sacrificing quality. So the solution to this problem was to implement a system to help PPM Global Services manage resources and monitor project performance. Our project scope was to configure a system that provided that functionality. And that system is called Oracle Primavera P6 EPPM. The EPPM stands for Enterprise Project Portfolio Management. So our scope of work was to configure the P6 application to meet the customer's requirements. Now notice that our scope of work did not include helping PPM Global Services select the appropriate system, nor did it include helping them install and host the system. Prior to us coming on to this project, PPM had already selected and purchased P6, and they had already selected a hosting provider who had installed the system for them. So to perform this scope of work, we identified 4 deliverables. The first was to create a requirements traceability matrix. The second was to provide a configuration design document. The third was to provide user acceptance testing and a sign-off sheet for the testing. And the fourth was to provide the configured environment itself. We also identified 3 critical success factors. The first was that 100% of the user acceptance test scripts were signed off. The second was that for the remaining deliverables, PPM Global Services would sign off on those deliverables. And then the final success factor that we had was that all this had to be completed by May 7th, 2014. So our team that we had was starting with myself, Mike Shore. I was the project manager and the Primavera subject matter expert. I was responsible for the management of project activities as well as configuring the system. Satish is our quality analyst and testing lead. He had oversight into the oversight for the user acceptance testing. And then Matthew Sims is our business analyst and technical writer. He was responsible for the identification and documentation of the requirements. So moving into the management and execution of this project, I want to start off with explaining 3 primary risks that we identified. The first was poor client resource commitment. This came from the fact that this project wasn't a project that had committed resources from the client. What happened is we had to obtain these resources at certain points in time. So for example, for the user acceptance testing, we had to schedule time with some of the PPM resources to have them walk through that. So this provided a risk to the project that we would have poor client resource commitment. The second risk that we identified is we had limited P6 expertise on our project team. I was the only one with any experience with P6 and knew anything about configuring the system. And the third risk that we had identified as a primary risk was that the customer could change requirements. Of course, this risk occurs on almost every project, so we had to identify strategy for that risk. So for all three of these risks, we adopted a mitigation strategy. And you can see in the third column there the strategies that we employed for these risks. So next thing I want to do is walk through the project schedule, and I'm going to start in the executing section of the schedule. The very first activity that we had to perform as part of executing the project was to perform a requirements analysis, and the main output of that activity was the requirements traceability matrix. So let me show you the matrix here. On this matrix, you can see that we identified a total of 13 requirements, provide a description, categorize the requirement, identified its source, and then provided a status. So this was our requirements traceability matrix. So once we had the matrix, the next thing we did was we began to design the system. So part of designing the system, I developed a dashboard for the client. So this dashboard, of course, there's a lot that went into providing this dashboard functionality, but this was the main output, the main report that they wanted to be able to see. And what this dashboard did was it provided a Gantt chart whereby our project sponsor, the company owner, could view the status of the project. So you can see down here, I've got a portlet providing project health. You'll notice that right now that there's some projects in here that says the project has not started or there's no summary data available. Where it says there's no summary data available, that's because we handed off this environment to PPM about 3 weeks ago, and they're now migrating their active data in here. So there's some information that hasn't yet migrated over. Down here, there's a portlet for any issues that come up. There's a schedule performance portlet. There's a portlet providing some statistics. It's comparing the baseline finish to the scheduled finish date. And then there's also a section down here for the resource allocation. Here's the list of the PPM resources and the number of projects that they're assigned to. So this dashboard was created and provided to PPM, and then our next part of the schedule is that we had to walk through user acceptance testing and provide a sign-off sheet for user acceptance testing. So you can see here, this is our sign-off sheet that we created. We had a test for all 13 of our requirements. And then we just identified the tester, the test data that we use, whether or not the test passed or failed, and then any comments or defects that were found. So you notice that any defects that were found, we were able to correct those and then change the status of the pass. All right, so another note here about our schedule is during the execution phase here, we are moving into it, we baseline the schedule. That's what you see here with these yellow bars. then you'll notice that there are some activities that show up as blue. They're outside of the baseline bar. And that's because we ran into an issue that happened within the float of our project. And that issue was a Java issue. What happened is that as we were utilizing the system, we had an incompatible version of Java, and then we had an incompatible version of Internet Explorer. So the impact is that it delayed our project delayed project activities by about 2 weeks. Fortunately, both happened within the float, so they did not impact the end date of our project. Our resolution of that issue was that we had to delete the current version of Java, reinstall an older version, and then use Internet Explorer version 10 in compatibility mode. So some project successes that we had was that each success factor was met. PPM's been using the system now for 3 weeks without incident. And then our project sponsor provided some positive feedback. He said that by all measures, the project was a success, and that he now has the tool he needs to manage his resources and portfolio of projects. Then I want to end off here talking about our lessons learned on this project. The first lesson learned was that risk planning is important. We identified those 3 primary risks early on, and then we had to implement our mitigation strategy in order to successfully resolve those issues or those risks that came up. We were able to mitigate the risk, so we didn't run into issues with poor client resource commitment. We didn't have any issues with the fact we only had one person who had expertise in P6, and we didn't run into any issues with customer changing their requirements. Another lessons learned that we had was that you should plan on scheduling calls whenever you're communicating within the project team. Email just isn't always sufficient, particularly for complex communications. The third item was that user acceptance testing is easier to control when performed in person. So we had some UAT that occurred in person. We had some that happened over the phone. Certainly the ones that happened in person were a lot easier to resolve any issues and to preempt any issues. And the final lesson learned is simply that Java sucks. Java caused us lots of heartache and headaches over this project. So for whatever reason, it updates constantly, and trying to get an older version of Java can be a pain. So Java, if it can be avoided, should be avoided in future system implementations. So that's all that I have for presentation. Just want to say thank you and appreciate the efforts of everyone on the team.